Okay, so it's 2023 and pretty much everyone agrees that climate change is a real thing. We all at least have some level of basic understanding that greenhouse gas emissions are causing the Earth to heat up, right? Well, climate denial is becoming a bit more prevalent online, especially in right-wing conservative spaces. But why? And why should we even care what some right-wingers think online? And does what some of these talking heads say online really affect political action? Well, in this video, hopefully we will be diving into all of these topics and using some specific examples of some prominent online figures. Okay, so before we get into this, we're going to have to try and understand what climate denial is. Well, simply it's not believing the current scientific consensus when it comes to climate change, which I have summarized into two different forms, which can be outlined as either outright climate denial or climate skepticism. Outright climate denial is much more easy to explain because it pretty much is that humans have had no impact on the climate. Climate skepticism, though, is much more varied because, well, they could believe humans are only accelerating the natural process of climate change, or they could believe that, yeah, humans do contribute to climate change, the core factor, but we can't really do anything to stop it, and it's just something we're going to have to deal with the consequences of. So now you have a basic understanding of the concepts, but why is this important when it comes to the overall discussion of climate change and when it comes to things like decarbonisation and political action to reverse the effects of climate change? Well, for more people who don't believe in climate change, the less that will fight for positive environmental reform by doing things like vote for political action that will positively impact the environment. And seemingly with the ever-growing divide between the left and right in modern politics, issues like climate change have been pushed to the forefront. And because climate change is seen more commonly in left-leaning ideologies in the modern sense, it has become a lefty issue. This has pushed people away from ideas of climate reform. Even certain individuals who you might not consider climate deniers or even believe in positive reform and change to climate policy to vote for the opposite because they prefer the other party's other stances. So how do online figures play a part in this? Well, one of the main ways people have been introduced to some level of climate denial is either interpersonal connections or online. Interpersonal connections is much more complicated and has to deal with education reform, educating people, but online we're tackling today. YouTube accounts like the Daily Wire and traditional television shows like Fox News introduce these extreme ideas to people, which include climate denial. There could be plenty of reasons why these individuals speak the way that they do. Maybe they are just following the right-wing rhetoric we see in Australia and America and just towing the party line. Or maybe it's because companies like the Daily Wire receive money from natural gas, oil and coal companies in the form of donations or even direct ownership. Now let's take a look at an example of one of these individuals, who I think slightly breaks the status quo of doing this purely for financial gain from fossil fuel industry, but still has a damaging effect on people's perception of climate change. Have you seen this man? If you haven't, well, you're lucky, because this is Jordan Peterson, studying out as a self-help guru using his PhD in behavioral psychology to make this type of content. The content basically being make your bed and you'll feel better and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But now Peterson is more known as a guy who cries a lot and says a lot of transphobic statements on Twitter.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
While Peterson claims to be apolitical, he definitely seems to lean much further right comparatively, and Jordan Peterson is a climate denier, no doubt. Well, okay, so Peterson doesn't directly say he doesn't believe in climate change, but rather it's not that big of a deal and Earth's climate changes all the time. So maybe characterize him as a climate skeptic. Peterson's ideology can basically be summarized as, there was an ice age before, but it ain't icy now, so I guess climate change is just a natural occurrence. Which, okay, yes, climate does change over time, over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But when we are talking about climate change in the modern context, that isn't true at all, because literally most of the entire scientific community agrees that climate change is real. And why do we even trust him? The man doesn't even know what climate is. Like, just watch this clip and lose a couple brain cells like I did.
That's what bothers me about the climate change types. It's like, this is something that bothers me about it technically. It's like, climate is about everything. So, okay. But your models aren't based on everything. Your models are based on a set number of variables.
Yeah.
So that means you've reduced the variables, which are everything, to that set. Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything? And that's not just a criticism. That's like, if it's about everything, your models aren't right. Because your models do not and cannot model everything.
But why does this even matter? He's a self-help guy. His opinions about climate change shouldn't be relevant. But Peterson is also a pretty large figure in a lot of right-wing spaces online. Peterson is a part of what we like to call the alt-right pipeline, which if you don't know, it is good job at saying off this corner of the internet. But Peterson is sort of the entry level to a lot of the more outrageous ideas that present themselves in the alt-right pipeline and in much more extreme ideologies. Peterson sort of lays the groundwork, introducing people to things like climate skepticism, outright racism, and transphobia. This part of the internet is viewed by millions of young men. So Peterson's views on climate change are constantly being viewed by millions of people online, whether it's his YouTube channel or in other spaces like the Joe Rogan podcast. Peterson is also insidious because he is portrayed as a great intellectual and an expert in everything he talks about. And me, a university student, is not trying to deny that he is intelligent, because he is. About behavioral psychology, his ability to not understand a simple concept like what climate is when it's in specific regards to climate change is worrying, because that's like one of the first things you should know when speaking on the topic. And the effect of millions of people consuming this content could at bare minimum lead to so much more climate skepticism or even outright climate denial. And it probably has already happened. One of the most dangerous parts of Peterson's ideology is his reliance on himself. Peterson is in love with systemic structures like capitalism and believes you can only rely on yourself to make changes in life. This is a remnant of his self-help days, and I agree in a self-help context. But when it comes to making real systemic change in the world, it kind of stamps it out. It'll be almost impossible unless you have unlimited resources and time for one person to stop and reverse the effects of climate change. So it might be easier to just ignore it. But together as one with a collective goal, we can make change. We can vote for more sustainable power sources. We can vote for politicians and parties that will protect our forests and our seas. We can vote for positive climate action, especially in regards to decarbonisation. We can make change, just not by ourselves, but together.